What's going on, YouTube? And welcome to Goal Line Hockey. It's Kevin Forte, and today we are taking a look at what we all expected, right? The Eastern Conference Finals between the Carolina Hurricanes and the Florida Panthers. Really good season for both of these teams. Congratulations to both of them on their wonderful path to the Eastern Conference Final. Who will go to the Stanley Cup Final? We're going to take a look at that today. So the Carolina Hurricanes are the first team in the right side. We've got the Carolina Hurricanes. They had a really impressive season. They won the Metropolitan Division, a very competitive division. 113 points during the regular season, 52 wins, and they put together a pretty strong playoff run, a inspirational season for this team, despite the fact they have some pretty key injuries up front. The Carolina Hurricanes have found a way to pull themselves all the way to the conference final, and we'll talk about who the credit should go a lot to in that regard, but a lot of guys have been picking up the weight. So you look at what this team has done through the first two rounds. In the first round, they beat the New York Islanders in 6 games. It seemed like they really had control most of that series. The Islanders kept it fairly close, but they got some key road victories. They were able to win Game 4 on the road, and they were also able to win Game 6 on the road, which is not easy to do, but they were able to fight off the Islanders, maybe putting them on the brink of elimination in a Game 7, so you got to give credit where it's due there. You also look at the second round, where they beat the New Jersey Devils in actually easier fashion. They beat them in 5 games. So a really impressive playoff run so far for the Hurricanes, and I think this is going to be a benefit for them going into the conference finals. They have not played a Game 7 yet compared to the Florida Panthers, who have. So this is really good for the Hurricanes. They're going to get a little bit of rest. They're going to have a little time to re-energize before the conference finals. So this is going to be a good thing for them. Also, you look at some of their injuries along the way. Going into the postseason, they were going to be without Andrei Svechnikov, who's having knee surgery, so obviously best wishes to him. We're not going to see him in this series. Max Pacioretty came out with an Achilles injury back in the middle of January, so again, haven't seen him in a while. Same thing for Andre Kasha. We haven't seen him all season. He has a concussion, as well as Teuvo Teravainen up front. He got a really bad slash from Scott Mayfield. He also is having hand surgery. So none of those guys up front. Mind you, most of those guys, maybe arguably, Kasha is a third-line guy. Other than that, all those guys are top 6 players. So at the very least, 3 of those 4 players are top 6 forwards on a healthy Carolina Hurricanes roster, which is incredible. Despite the fact all those guys are out. They're also without Jake Gardiner, who we've not seen this season. He had hip surgery, and there's really no indication that he will be back at all this playoffs. So all of those are the injuries for the Hurricanes. There's also some lingering injuries. There's been questions about how healthy is Anderson, who didn't start the playoffs in that Islanders series. His first start was Game 6 against the Islanders. Or was it? Maybe it was Game 5. Either way, that was kind of where he got going. So, and then he's kind of rode that into the second round. And Antti Raanta seems to be hurt, which is part of the reason we haven't seen him yet. But even if that's the case, they still have Peter Kochetkov, who a lot of the fans, including myself, would like to see at some point. But there's a lot of goalies there in Carolina that if one isn't playing well or one gets injured, they always have the next guy in line. And that's kind of been the story for the Hurricanes this entire playoffs. This is a team that is, despite all those injuries I mentioned, you look at what they've done here in the playoffs. Their top scorers in the postseason, when you look at what they have done, is pretty impressive. Sebastian Aho with 10 points leading the way. No surprise there. But this one may surprise you. Jordan Martinook has tied with Sebastian Aho for points leading the team in the postseason. He has 3 goals and 7 assists for 10 points in 11 games. Now, what's even more incredible about that is 10 of those points came in those 5 games against the New Jersey Devils in the second round. So he did not register a point against the Islanders in the first round. He picks up 10 points in 5 games, which makes it all the more impressive. Jordan Martinook was on waivers earlier this season from the Hurricanes and has now stayed with the team been a huge guy in the locker room, and not only in the locker room, he's producing on the ice. So really good season for Martinook, a really good story there. Jesper Fast, former New York Ranger, he's got 8 points so far this playoff. Same thing for Jarvis, Burns, Stahl, Marty Necas. Jesperi Kotkaniemi scored a couple big goals this entire playoffs. So you're seeing production from everybody in the lineup, and that's what the Hurricanes have needed, right? It's kind of a scoring by committee, and you would think with guys like Teravainen and some of those other guys out of the lineup that maybe this would be sort of one of those things where they're not scoring enough. That's absolutely not the case. The Hurricanes have been able to score despite the fact they have all those injuries up front. And the only guy that I'm honestly kind of disappointed in so far this playoffs has been Jesse Puljujarvi, which he really has struggled his entire career before coming to the Hurricanes. So other than Puljujarvi, and I hate to call out one player, but that's probably the only player that I'm really disappointed in terms of the Carolina Hurricanes so far. Now, the one player to watch, of course, other than Martinook and Aho, you've got some really good complementary pieces like Jordan Stahl, like Seth Jarvis, Marty Necas, and Kotkaniemi. But the key guy to watch for that everybody seems to forget about, and I think the further this playoffs has gone along, people are starting to remember, Brent Burns. You know, I saw in the first round against the Islanders, I remember even in person watching I think I went to game 4 when they lost, how tough he is to play against as a defenseman. I think a lot of people have forgotten just how good Brent Burns is as a defenseman, and I think we're starting to see the turnaround of Brent Burns, right? In San Jose, toward the end, it just seemed like he kind of lost a step, maybe got a little slower, and that's definitely fair, but he's still producing. He has 8 points in 11 games, and he's so good defensively. He is so defensively sound. He's always the guy that's, on the penalty kill. He's probably out there for the entire PK. In the final 10 minutes of the game, probably at least 6 of those 10 minutes, Brent Burns is out there for most of the time. So he's one of those guys that's just a great shutdown defenseman. Extremely frustrating if you're the opposing team watching. You're trying to watch your superstar come in, trying to dance around. It doesn't work. You don't dance around Brent Burns very often, if ever. He's an extremely good defenseman. He's got the long stick. I know everybody loves that saying, but he does. His stick it's stuff to go around him. And that's going to be a really important part of this series for the Hurricanes if they want to beat the Panthers, which leads me, the Panthers fans are probably like, are you going to talk about the Panthers at all? Yes, we're going to talk about them now. The Florida Panthers have also had a really good run this year, finishing at the bottom of the Eastern Conference wildcard standings. But here they are in the conference finals. You want to talk about against all odds. They beat the Boston Bruins, the President's Trophy winning Cup favorite, in the first round, stunning them in 7 games. And then they play the Toronto Maple Leafs, who really, it seemed like were playing with, they had all the pressure, right? They go into Toronto, win game 1 and 2, boom, boom. Then they win game 3, put the Leafs on the brink for the rest of the series. They lose game 4. They come back and win game 5 in overtime in Toronto. And similar to the Hurricanes, they're getting a lot of scoring by committee as well, which is kind of making the story interesting here with the Florida Panthers, because you look at some of the guys, I kind of said something, I was thinking this the other night watching game 5, and when we're talking about a playoff run, and obviously Barkov is still doing well, but when Barkov is not even really mentioned in the playoffs for the Panthers, you know that this team is firing on all cylinders, because we know how good Barkov is, right? The underrated conversation about Barkov is kind of over. We know how good he is. And I don't think he's 100%. I think he's a guy at the end of the season we're going to hear like, yeah, Barkov was fighting an injury, because he doesn't look like himself. You guys can let me know down below. But it doesn't matter, because there's so many other guys scoring for the Hurricanes and providing that depth that it doesn't really even matter if Barkov's injured or not. That's how good the Panthers are right now, just how deep they are. And you look at Tkachuk leading the way. He's got 16 points in 12 games. Carter Verhaeghe, man, the Islanders traded him for Kristof Skudlevskis. I shake my head at that one every time, but he's playing really well for the Florida Panthers. Picked up some huge goals for them in the playoffs. Same thing for Brandon Montour, who's got 6 goals and is tied with Sam Reinhart for most goals during the playoffs for the Panthers. Who would have guessed that? Of course, Barkov's in there, Reinhart, Bennett, Anton Lundell, really good along the boards. He reminds me a lot of John Tavares earlier in his career. Really good up against the boards. He wins all those puck battles. I really like Anton Lundell. He's kind of the next, you want to talk about the next underrated guy in Florida? I would probably say is Anton Lundell. Really, really talented, and is going to be a really tough matchup for the Carolina Hurricanes down the middle. You've also got some other guys like Nick Cousins, who got the big goal in Game 5 to send the Panthers to the conference final. We're seeing guys like Eetu Luostarinen. Ekblad had a really good Game 5 for the Panthers. Duclair. This whole team is really talented up and down the lineup, and they're producing. And that's really what's really exciting about this team is they're getting production from all throughout the lineup. Now that leads to the conversation between the pipes for both of these teams. You know, going into the playoffs, you probably wouldn't have had much faith in either of these teams, right? But, of course, it sounds like for the Hurricanes, they're really sticking with Freddie Anderson. We could see Antti Ranta or Peter Kochetkov, but it's safe to say Game 1, it's going to be Freddie Anderson for the Carolina Hurricanes. He's put together a really good playoff so far, and I expect that to continue. For the Florida Panthers, it's been the Bobrovsky show. You know, for the beginning of the playoffs, it was Alex Lyon in the Boston Bruins series. They decided to go back to Bobrovsky, and they haven't looked back since. Bobrovsky has been really, really good for the Panthers, has allowed them to come back in that Bruins series, has allowed them to dominate the Leafs in the second round, coming up with some key saves, and now going into the conference finals, this is probably as weird as it sounds, probably the most interesting challenge for the Florida Panthers because of how systematically sound the Hurricanes are. This might actually be their toughest test yet. Now, with that said, the Florida Panthers are the Cinderella story of the playoffs. They remind me a lot of the 2011 LA Kings and the 2019 St. Louis Blues, and the team that nobody really gave much of a chance, right? The expectations going into the year were high, but you know, last season they had, quote-unquote, a better roster, right? They had Giroux. They made some changes behind the bench, so there was some questions about how good they could really be. They started the season off really poor, right? Spencer Knight did not get off to the start we were hoping for, got sent down to the AHL. We haven't seen him since. Bobrovsky has continued to struggle at points, but all it takes is the next season, which is the postseason, and the Panthers are where they're at. Now, the Hurricanes is a little bit of a different story, right? It's the same Cinderella phenomenon, but for a different reason. It's how good they are systematically under Rod Brind'Amour. I think you put Rod Brind'Amour behind any bench in the NHL, he will find a way to get the most out of that team. And that's what he's done with the Hurricanes this year. They are so good defensively, it's extremely difficult to really maintain possession. They're very aggressive on the forecheck. They're extremely aggressive on the penalty kill. And they're also just in general, in terms of systematically, in terms of high danger opportunities, they do not give you much at all. And we always talk about how the Islanders under Barry Trotz were so good systematically. If the Islanders had Barry Trotz still with a little bit more talent and more goal-scoring capability, like the Hurricanes have, that's really the formula to success. And this Hurricanes team is giving me the vibes of that 2019 team we saw. They lost to the Boston Bruins in that series, but they got to the Eastern Conference Finals. And I think this is the year that Carolina could maybe even go further than that. Now, with that said, you know, looking at these teams offensively, defensively, and goaltending-wise comparisons, you know, goals for, definitely in favor of the Florida Panthers. During the regular season, they were 5th in the NHL for goals for. Carolina was 15th, but we've seen in the playoffs, Carolina has had no problem scoring goals. So that's not necessarily a weakness for the Hurricanes. But again, in terms of roster one-for-one, I think I'd take the Florida Panthers offensively in this series. Defensively, it's extremely close as well, but I'm going to go here with the Carolina Hurricanes. I think the Hurricanes have the edge defensively. I really like Brent Burns. I think Burns is really the X factor. And as much as I like Ekblad for the Panthers, I think Brent Burns is having that kind of a season. If they could redo the Norris Trophy in terms of the playoffs being factored in, it might be Brent Burns. That's how good he's been. But we'll see how things continue with that. Not a knock at the Florida Panthers defense. I want to preface that. I just think the Hurricanes defense has just been firing on all cylinders under the Brendan Moore system. I got to give them the edge there. Then in between the pipes, I'm much more confident right now in Sergei Bobrovsky. And normally I would never say that. But, you know, there was a couple games where the Hurricanes gave up some goals. They gave up 8 goals, 4 shorthanded in Game 3. Now, again, that was the outlier in the series, but, you know, I wasn't as huge of a fan of the Hurricanes in the second round in goaltending. But considering the caliber of offense that the Leafs are capable of, Sergei Bobrovsky played really, really exceptionally well. And even in the first round against Boston, played really well. I'd rather go with the hot hand there in Sergei Bobrovsky, which really makes this a tough decision on who I think is going to go to the Stanley Cup final. But, you know, there's a difference between what my heart wants and what I think the reality is. And it's always a conflict between what I want and what will happen, what I think is going to happen. Now, if I know anything about this playoffs, I've been so wrong this entire playoffs with all these predictions. I do want to preface that. And normally in this spot, I would pick the Carolina Hurricanes because systematically, I think they're really difficult. We saw what they did against the Devils and the Islanders, extremely locked down defensively. But there's also the factor that you just can't put a finger on, and you have no pulse. The pulse side of it comes into question. And this Florida Panthers team is something that I haven't seen since 2019. And that is the St. Louis Blues. You can't explain it. They just find a way to win when nobody gives them an opportunity to. And that's why, normally in this spot, I would have picked the Carolina Hurricanes. But I'm going to pick the Florida Panthers to win this series in 6 games. I don't know what it is. I can't explain to you why I think the Panthers will win this series. I don't know if it's maybe the fact we haven't seen the best of Barkov yet, and I think Barkov is starting to turn the corner in this series, and I think he's going to be able to just do some spectacular things. I don't know. I really can't explain to you because I really think that the Hurricanes should win this series, which leads me to think the opposite in that I think I'm going to go with my heart on this one for once, and I think the Florida Panthers win this series in 6. Everybody's doubted the Florida Panthers this entire playoffs. And I think that this is their time. You know, this is a team that last year won the President's Trophy for the most points during the regular season. Everybody going into this year thought this was the down year, right? We've seen the President's Trophy curse kill so many teams, right? 2019, the Tampa Bay Lightning, they rattled off 2 straight Stanley Cups in the years after that. Colorado, right? Their run was supposed to be in 2021. They got bounced by the Vegas Golden Knights and the disappointment from McKinnon that year. In 2017, right, the Washington Capitals win the President's Trophy, have Kevin Shattenkirk, and in 2018, they win the Stanley Cup. What I'm trying to explain is usually the year after a team wins the President's Trophy is actually their better year. And I have that President's Trophy shirt from last year from the Florida Panthers, and I know most Panthers fans want to forget about that, but I think that is what's led them to this season. They have the belief that they can beat anybody in the entire National Hockey League. And the Florida Panthers have faced adversity. They were down 3-1 in that series against the Bruins. They've found a way to get back up from the gridiron, and they have been able to rattle off 5 straight wins in their past 6 games. Sometimes you can't explain it. And I think right now the Florida Panthers are on a run that you can't explain. They just continue to win. I'm going with the Panthers winning this series in 6 games. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. What do you guys think of this series? Who are your predictions to win? Let me know down below. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you guys again next time. Peace.